Hello everyone, my name is Zabreen Khan. I'm a student at Stanford University and I'm from Lahore, Pakistan. Now, when I said that, I'm sure dozens of ideas and images crossed your mind. Maybe something like terrorism, slums, radical Islam, hijabs, or child marriage. Let's delve deeper into some of these stereotypes. In the West, many tend to believe that Pakistan feeds terrorism. They think it's a country that promotes guns and jihad. Little do they realize that Pakistan itself has suffered far more from terrorist attacks than most other countries in the world. Over 57,000 people have died due to terrorist acts of violence in my country. The other major stereotype, the one I'd like to focus on today, is that Pakistan is a misogynistic country in which dozens of crimes are committed against women. I won't completely deny this. The statement has some truth, but it's not as black and white as many of us perceive it to be. I'm here to share anecdotes with you that aren't publicized, stories that aren't told. My home is not just filled with bombs, xenophobic aggression, and submissive women. These are the notions that flood the media, the only face of Pakistan that we see here in the West. I'm here to show you the Pakistan that you didn't know existed. Let's start with what's most familiar to me, the woman I grew up observing, my mother. She's actually in the audience today. She flew 10,000 miles to see me here. My mother never fails to astound me. She is the most selfless, strong, and supportive woman I know. My grandparents always tell me she was a goody two-shoes growing up, much like me, never disobeying rules and always working hard to achieve her next goal. But while my mother was in school, like many women of her time, she had an arranged marriage. She was engaged at 15 and married at 19. Most people would assume that my mother's marriage halted her education and her career. But my mother would never let that happen. She always emphasized the value of a good education and decided she would give back to the community by starting a small school. At 24, she built the school from the ground up on a small loan with her first child in hand. Today, it has become a well-reputable, internationally accredited K-12 school in the heart of Lahore. After my mother had my two older siblings and was pregnant with me, she decided to go back to school to finish her master's degree. When I was growing up, she seemed to juggle 3 kids, a marriage, her job, and school so effortlessly. She never failed to attend my volleyball games or award ceremonies, video camera in hand. She spent entire evenings teaching me how the digestive system worked for science class or helping me put together my poster board for the school fair. Sometimes I wonder how she had the hours to do everything she was doing and do it so well. Mama, you are my superwoman. You taught me that being female is not a limitation. It's a blessing, if only we have the confidence to treat it like one. What I've learned is that every young girl needs a woman to aspire to. I had my mother had her grandmother. We called her Ammi Jaan. Ammi Jaan, my great-grandmother, a woman whose prime was in the 1940s and 50s, took charge of her husband's petroleum business. She doubled its revenue every 3 months while still being the backbone of her family. So to everyone that says women can't have it all, I say keep your thoughts to yourselves. Women can have it all. And the women in my life prove it. Now, the other side of the stereotype is that all men in Pakistan are patriarchal and controlling. I won't completely deny this. It's a sentiment I've experienced myself from time to time. But I'm lucky enough to have a father who encourages me every day to do just as much, if not more, than all the men in my family. My father also supported my mother every step of the way as she built her career. He always tells me he doesn't want me to be remembered as the granddaughter, daughter, or sister of someone. He wants me to make a name for myself. Never have I been discouraged on the virtue of being a girl. My father knew exactly when to hold on to the handlebars of my bike and when it was time to let go. Every bone in his body told him to protect and shelter me, but nevertheless, he let me travel 7,000 miles away from home to boarding school so that I could have access to opportunities he believed I deserved. My father is a testament to the fact that the struggle for women's rights in Pakistan isn't one where all men are on one side and all women are on the other. He shows us that there are men in my home who try to make it a better place for women. He helped me realize how important it is to have men supporting the female agenda. Now you may be thinking, my family is an anomaly. The rest of Pakistan must not be like this. But that's not true either. I want to tell you about a girl I met through a volunteering project. Her name is Asma. When I volunteered at Asma School, which is in a village a few hours outside of the city I live in, we were both around 15. She was by far the smartest girl in her class. She raised her hand to answer every question. Her homework was always completed on time. She had never failed a test. Asma was the perfect student. But one day, she told me her family was in the process of setting up her engagement because they no longer had the money to financially support her. It is from that moment onwards that Asma and I had a shared goal to start a vocational school for women, a school where they would learn to sew and embroider to create a small but steady income for themselves. We fundraised to rent out a small room and buy sewing machines and products. The older women of the community who had learned the skill for housework needs came to teach the younger girls every day. It was inspiring to see how that community of women came together to make that vocational school a possibility. Women in that community, and in the rest of Pakistan for that matter, are incredibly supportive of one another. Here is a photo of the room. Asma is seated next to me. Thanks to the vocational school, Asma was able to hold off her engagement until later. When Asma and her friends started manufacturing and selling their own products, they weren't just learning a useful skill or becoming financially independent. It was so much more than that. They were gaining control of their lives. They were getting a say in how their futures would turn out. These 15-year-old girls no longer had to find a husband because they couldn't afford not to. The vocational school was, in every sense of the word, empowering for Asma and all the young girls in her neighborhood. These are the stories the media doesn't tell you. It pains me to see a one-sided black and white portrayal of my country in the media here in America. But when we engage in this kind of oversimplification and hasty judgment making, it doesn't just hurt those who are being misportrayed. It hurts us too. Because drawing the line between us and them, saying things like they do all these horrible things that we don't, and hastily criticizing other cultures for their shortcomings makes it easier for us to gloss over our own. It makes it easier for us to paint them as the villains and us as the heroes. But in reality, it's a lot more complicated than that. Every society has its strengths and weaknesses, and America is no exception. The fact that gender inequality is present in the United States is not news to any of us, but sometimes we trick ourselves into thinking that because we've been through a prominent civil rights movement and 2 waves of feminist movements, we're ahead of the times. We are complacent, and this complacency is detrimental to progress. In America, we tell ourselves we live in a post-sexist world. But if any woman will reflect closely on her experiences in this country, she will tell you that this is far from true. So what are some of the problems women face in the United States? In my experience, there are 4 major areas that need improvement. First, there's labeling. Young women are always told, don't be too curvy or too flat. Don't wear too much makeup, but wear enough makeup that it looks like you tried. Don't be too smart or too ambitious, but don't be dumb. Don't be too conservative or too promiscuous. Speak your mind, but don't show attitude. Stand up for yourself, but don't be bitchy. No matter what we do, someone always has something to say. And sometimes we take it to heart. We come home and vent to our mothers or our friends about that one person who called us bitchy. Have you ever heard a guy complain about being called a douche? No, they own it. So as long as labels exist, we can't let them hold us down. The next time you're called bitchy, flaunt it. We all have to be a little bitchy to get things done in this world. Then there are problems that aren't as easy to accept, like objectification, for example. As an international student in the United States, I can say I didn't see very much of this when I was back home. In the US, women are portrayed as sexual objects everywhere, in TV shows, movies, magazines, ads, the list goes on. Their sexuality and physical appearance is emphasized rather than their intellect, their personality, or their sense of humor. And this changes the way we think, without us knowing or even realizing it. Psychologists have shown that men react to images of sexualized women the same way they react to images of objects. Too many times I have experienced or witnessed a young woman being honked at or stared at. Back in boarding school, sometime during my freshman year, my best friend and I were at the movies. It was around 2 p.m. on a Saturday, usually a busy time for movie theaters. We were walking down a small road to a restaurant close by. I was playing soft music on my iPhone, and my best friend slowly started bobbing her head, dancing to the tune. A few seconds later, two middle-aged men behind us whistled and said to my friend, "You want to show us a little more of that?" We glanced at them, completely taken aback, and hurried down the street in fear. We were 14 at the time, and these men were presumably well into their 40s. They treated my best friend's body as if it was made for a man's gaze. I assure you, it was not. Objectification leads to my next point: sexual assault. 1 in 5 women in the United States is sexually assaulted in college, and it's only getting worse. We've all heard about the girl who carried her mattress around Columbia for days, or the all-American swimmer at Stanford who was found on the sidewalk on top of an unconscious girl. We think these stories are just in the press, until it happens to our daughters, our sisters, our best friends. Until we get a call in the middle of the night from a loved one, hysterically crying, confused as to what just happened. College shouldn't be a dangerous place, but the danger of being sexually assaulted while in college is very, very real. Finally, there is a major lack of women in professional roles. Having worked in the tech and VC space in the Valley, I've seen this firsthand. Less than 6% of women have investing roles in venture capital firms. The picture isn't much better for the rest of the nation. A recent report by the New York Times shows that men named John hold more CEO titles than all women combined. Girls do far better than boys in school, but they rarely get the top jobs in the professional world. The other day, I was speaking to someone who works on the trading floor of a bank. Out of curiosity, I asked him, "How many women trade with you?" He told me there are no women on his floor. 0. Why? Because women would impede on the bro-y culture of our trading desks. When women are around, we don't feel comfortable cursing freely or opening up about our personal lives. We just can't be ourselves. This boys' club culture in the working world needs to be eradicated before we see a dozen more Ellen Pao trials. Then there was another lady at a recruiting event who told me it was difficult to have male mentors at her firm. It took them years to tell her that they were afraid of giving her negative feedback because they thought she would cry. We aren't in first grade. We won't cry if you tell us how to improve. I would even argue that women receive constructive criticism far better than men because we don't see it as a blow to our ego. The US has a long ways to go to improve this space for women. How about we start by changing the maternity leave policy? The United States is one of 9 countries in the world that does not provide paid maternity leave to mothers in the workforce, oftentimes forcing them to choose either between their families or their careers. Women shouldn't have to pick one or the other. I think we can do a damn good job at both. Along with more women in tech, VC, and finance, the United States also needs more women in government. Benazir Bhutto, the former Prime Minister of Pakistan, had the most powerful political role in the country as early as 1988. Even today, the percentage of women in government in Pakistan is higher than that of the US. In terms of female representation in government, the United States is 73rd in a long list of countries with a percentage of 18.3. We tell ourselves these issues are ingrained in biology or in culture, but with that attitude, we'd still be wasting tons of metal manufacturing corsets and telling women to stay home on voting day. Non-governmental sectors are important as well. In Pakistan, women run the household and fashion industries. Women also run 80% of the country's NGOs. Of course, it would be great to venture out of these fields, but it's a strength we need to appreciate. In the United States, the fashion industry heavily targets women, but is dominated by men. Men call all the shots and take the C-level positions. My purpose in talking about the status quo in the United States is not to compare it to that of Pakistan, to make a judgment on which is superior. I'm trying to suggest that we would all be more aware of what's going on in our own communities if we didn't spend so much time criticizing others for their shortcomings. That before we try to make the rest of the world a better place by pointing out what everyone else is doing wrong, we need to look within our own borders to figure out what we could be doing right. Because if we do that, if we take a close, hard look at ourselves, I think we'll find there's something we can learn from the societies we rush to criticize. Ultimately, we're all dealing with gender inequality. It just manifests itself in different ways. It's about time we learn to prop each other up rather than put each other down. With time and a foot in 2 worlds, I've realized that the misconceptions that are built around Pakistan and the US are wrongly buried in perceived differences. The US is similar pain to Pakistan, only in bite-sized pieces. The valley is at the top, an insulated, rich layer above the others. But if you look a little deeper, America has the same wounds I saw in Pakistan, the same whirlpools of confusion only protected by a semblance of propriety and order. Our young Pakistani girl in a hijab is a woman told to cross her legs in an NYC subway. Our 13-year-old child bride is a teen mom in Chattanooga, Tennessee. And our mother in a rural village who is expected to bear 6 children is a young professional in San Francisco who faces the pressure to give up her career to start a family. Every country faces problems that are heavy and daunting, and yet we forget the similarities and the struggles of basic humanity. It's in our nature to want to separate us from them, to put ourselves against an other. It's in our nature to ignore our own shortcomings, to make ourselves feel better by focusing on what everyone else is doing wrong. But as I've tried to show you today, hastily and mistakenly criticizing other cultures prevents introspection on our part. We turn a blind eye to what we do wrong, how we could improve, and we miss out on the chance to learn from each other. Humanity is both our shackle and our freedom. We get so lost in our differences that sometimes we forget we're all fighting the same battle. Thank you.